Jeff Lewis and Victor Richardson had asked me to chair the study committee of business incentives, and that's what I'm going to try and do, but I couldn't do it without the help of my colleagues you see up here with me. And I'm going to quickly introduce my colleagues. Right here to my right is Representative David Ralston from Blue Ridge. He chairs the Judiciary Committee. Starting on my left is John Lunsford, Representative John Lunsford. John is kind of a resident expert on almost everything important and critical to the state. So we couldn't do this without him. At the far end is Representative Chuck Martin, who is the Vice Chair of the Ways and Means Committee. This is the first meeting of probably about 3 or 4 more in these study committee hearings that we're going to have around the state. The agenda for those meetings has not been established yet. They will be shortly, and I hope that all of you have either arranged to have contact communication point between yourselves and Abby, our staff assistant. There she is. If you have not given your phone number and email address to her, and you have not gotten hers from her, please do so at some point today before you leave, so that we can keep all of you who are interested in the loop of what's going on and when it's going on. Tentatively, our next study committee meeting will be in September. I think the date of September 21. 22 rings a bell, but there will be more concrete information coming forth on that when we have it available, as well as an agenda. What we, right now, the plan is for future meetings is to try and gear those meetings to where they are either industry or topic specific, so we can focus on either that particular topic or that particular industry sector, and so we can hear testimony from those who hear what would best incentivize that particular industry group and grouping. So that's kind of the nature of what we're going to try to do this. That way you can pick and choose which meeting might be most important for you to attend. You're certainly welcome to attend any and all meetings that this committee has, but in case you want to manage and plan your time better, we hope to have industry groupings for this so you can make sure you're at that particular one if it applies to you. We're about to get started here in a moment with the presentations here. In today's meeting, being the first, we're mainly going to hear a presentation from about 4 different groups. And the focus of the meeting, where Georgia has been in the past with regards to economic development and business incentives and where we are today. I think that's important for us to know and get grounded in where we have been and where we are, so we can better understand how we need to proceed and what changes we need to be made in the upcoming session of the General Assembly. Before we call on our first presenter, I want to give each member on this committee a chance to make a comment or say a word before we get started. Anyone? Anything to say? We've got a microphone and an audience, and no politician has to bring this up. I appreciate that. I also want to express my gratitude to Komatsu. This is a very, very fine facility they have here. And Melinda Lemon, our local economic development director, if I'm saying that right, helped organize this here locally. And my appreciation to you, Melinda, and to George Creek, to us all earlier, all who assisted in bringing this together, as well as the people here at Komatsu. This is a great facility, and they do this often to accommodate this community here. And we certainly appreciate it. And I certainly welcome all of you here. So, the schedule today, from about 10 to noon, we're going to hear some presentations. We're going to take a 2-hour lunch break. You really want plenty of time to enjoy lunch, and then come back here at 2 o'clock, and we hope to conclude around 4. That really accommodates our teaching span, I guess, our president that way. And I hope that's convenient for all of you. So, first, we're going to hear a presentation from the Department of Economic Development and Tourism. And once they finish their presentation, hopefully there'll be some time for those of us on the committee to ask a few questions and make some comments before we move on to the next presentation. So, Economic Development and Tourism, go ahead. We welcome you here and look forward to hearing your comments.
Mr. Chairman, happy to be with you all today. My name is Chris Clark. I'm the Deputy Commissioner for the Georgia Department of Economic Development, responsible for global commerce. And what we wanted to do today is just as you asked us to do, kind of set it up. We're going to show you some of our recent statistics as we finished out FY06. Give you a little background on those. We've recently completed a survey of smaller sized companies in Georgia and some of the issues that they're struggling with, including some incentive issues. We'll share that with you. And then kind of walk you through the incentives and some of the holes that we currently have, and then obviously answer questions as we go through this. The governor just released these numbers 2 weeks ago. The green column that you see is 2006. That's fiscal year, which we just closed out. But you'll see how well Georgia's economy is improving. The prospect numbers are up considerably. Our announcements, 254 announcements this year. And by announcements, how do we define that? Those are new companies moving to Georgia. Those are existing Georgia companies that we work with that are expanding, adding jobs and investment. They might be one of the numerous entrepreneur businesses high-tech businesses that we work with. And in a few cases, they are companies that have expanded their reach and investment by now engaging in international trade. In 2006, those 254 announcements brought us 24,660 new jobs to Georgia. You just compare, Mr. Chairman, from 2005, and you can see pretty quickly how good this year's gone for us. The big investment number there is $5.7 billion worth of new investment into the state of Georgia as compared to $1.4 billion the year before. And in a moment, I'll show you the top 10 deals that we did for the year, which will give you a flavor for that investment. The percentage, we're a metrics-driven organization at the Department of Economic Development. Our metrics are increasing. A very interesting statistic line there is those projects requiring incentives. The percentage has gone down this year because of the large number, but around 31 of the companies that we located or expanded this year required some type of deal closing incentives. Now, that doesn't mean that they didn't take statutory incentives as well. We'll let Ed and the group from DOR talk about that, but when we talk about discretionary incentives, we're talking about deal closing funds, and we'll get into that too in just a moment. We like to use an average when we do projects, the amount of money that we put into it versus the amount of jobs that we generate. And this year, those companies that required discretionary incentives was cost us about $4,000 per job. Now, that doesn't include a little project that we announced over in West Point, Kia. Those numbers are a little bit higher than $4,000, but that's been the average for us this year. Our folks also called on just under 2,500 companies around the world this year. And as you can see, our exports continue to increase in Georgia, and we had another very, very good year for exports in and out of the ports. So I'd like to show you a few slides to kind of back up what have we been doing, why have we been so successful this year. A big component of it is our international reach. We've had a very large focus in the last 2 years on international economic development. Our department has 10, soon to be 11 offices around the world. Commissioner Lesser sends his regards. He's actually in China today interviewing people for our new office that will open in Beijing by the end of this year. The Beijing office will join offices in Asia that are currently located in Korea and Japan. The other offices that we have are in Mexico, Canada, Brazil, Chile. In Europe, we have our headquarters office in Germany with a staff of 5. We have satellite offices in France, the UK. We have an office in Israel that also covers Turkey. This year, we've had 42 missions to the countries that you see there. We visited 24 countries. The governor led 4 of those missions and had a total of 380 Georgia business leaders and elected officials travel with us. We had 32 official delegations into the state of Georgia. We probably had 200 to 300 different delegations into Georgia, but we really count those that have diplomatic components to it that meet with the governor, and that was 32 this year. Those 10 offices that we told you about currently cover 22 countries. Like I said before, the Israeli office covers Turkey. The Germany office covers most of Europe. We really have a huge focus in this area, and we've been very fortunate. We've also have a new focus in small business and entrepreneurship, as y'all are well aware. This year, last year, we took half of our regional staff we changed them from what they were essentially doing as community developers and asked them to start working with small and medium-sized businesses in Georgia, helping Georgia entrepreneurs start up their companies, and also to do a new program that we call the Entrepreneur Friendly Community. Our staff, those 10 individuals, called on over 800 Georgia small businesses this year and announced 28 projects through those companies growing their investment in Georgia. Our other regional staff focus on existing industry, larger size companies in Georgia. It's been a very good year outside of Atlanta. I think we all know that Atlanta is the economic engine of Georgia, but this year, all except for a couple of the top 10 announcements actually happened outside of Metro Atlanta. 62% total of those announcements were outside of Atlanta, 54% in rural Georgia. What's the difference between outside of Atlanta and rural Georgia? We take out Macon, Savannah, Augusta, Valdosta. But a statistic that we're very, very proud of is that 81% of the companies that we took to look at sites this year looked at sites in rural Georgia. That's an incredibly large number, and I think it points to the fact that our rural communities are catching up. They're doing better jobs of marketing themselves. We're doing a better job. They have very unique issues, though, and we'll talk about some of those in just a moment. But in some cases, our incentives are built to try to assist, and in some cases, they're not. Here are our major announcements this year. Most of you are very familiar with Kia. They'll create just under 2,900 jobs in West Point, Georgia. The irony there is there are only 3,000 people that live in West Point, Georgia. There'll be another 2,600 jobs from Tier 1 and Tier 2 suppliers, Mr. Chairman, that will follow Kia, that will go within around a 45-mile radius of the site in West Point. We'll get 5 of those in Georgia because of just-in-time and the negotiations that we had with Kia. There will be probably another 10 to 15 suppliers that will compete very heavily against Alabama. 2 of those suppliers have already announced in Alabama already. Disappointing for us. In both cases, the state of Alabama was very aggressive in offering free land to bring those companies in. AirTran is another great announcement for us this year, 2,500 jobs. Those that did not require incentives. Aflac, 2,000 new jobs down in Columbus. That did require an incentive package. Gulfstream, 1,500 jobs, $322 million worth of investment down in Savannah. That one also required deal closing incentives. Purdue Farms, 1,000 jobs, $155 million to expand their plant in Houston County. That one required a small incentive package. Ream, 700 new jobs in Baldwin County, and you've probably read the paper. Ream is now relocating their corporate headquarters to Atlanta. There was also another Ream project that announced in Henry County this year. None of those projects required deal closing incentives, although we did work very closely with Ream on the deal down in Milledgeville. MBTY, small incentive package over in Richmond County, and Hewlett-Packard, actually one of our second largest investment of the year, $800 million for 2 new data centers in Gwinnett and Fulton, and those required a small incentive package for them. And again, all of these folks might have taken discretionary incentives, but I was referring, or might have taken statutory incentives. We were referring to the discretionary incentives. I thought it would be interesting for you to hear a little bit about what small businesses are saying, as we've recently completed a major survey. And the ironic thing about Georgia small businesses in this survey, Mr. Chairman, is that it lines up almost exactly with a recent federal national survey done by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Small businesses in Georgia, like small businesses everywhere, are extraordinarily concerned about health care, rising health insurance costs. I know there's a lot of small business men and women in the room today that can attest to that. Access to capital. We've really focused a lot, thanks to your help, in the last 2 years on addressing this issue. Probably the biggest thing that we've done is we found in dealing with small businesses 2 years ago when we did another survey, we found that small businesses were really having a hard time getting capital between $35,000 and $250,000. If they were trying to get a small loan, up to $35,000, $50,000, they could go to a micro enterprise lender in Georgia. If they wanted a loan over $250,000, they could go to the Small Business Administration and get a loan. But that gap financing in there, they were having a very tough time convincing the local banks to support them. And so what the governor did was take some money from One Georgia and put it into a small business loan program where now we actually underwrite loans that local banks are making in rural Georgia to fill that gap. And so far we've done about 8 of those loans from a variety of types of businesses, from restaurants to health care, daycare centers, to kind of technology companies. And it's we've only had about $3 million in that pot this year. We hope to expand it as we go forward. But again, we're doing small loans. We're letting the local banks make the decision, and we're just underwriting to try to reduce their risk. Most of those loans have been done down in South Georgia, in some of the really poverty-stricken areas that we have down there. But it's a good program. We're happy with where we are in the first year, but of course there's more and more to be done. Workforce, I don't think we can talk enough about. When we talk about incentives, I think we can talk about incentives all day, but if we don't have the workforce to back it up, I know that's not quite the intent of this committee, but when we have a project like we recently had with Novartis, we talk a lot about our success. We don't do a good job talking about the ones we lose, but that's been a very public. We lost a vaccine manufacturer called Novartis to North Carolina. And at the end of the day, we had, for the most part, the incentives. There was one incentive that didn't quite work for them that we wished had. But in the end, our package was a little bit bigger than what North Carolina put out there. But at the end of the day, it was the workforce issue. They did not believe they could get the quality workforce in the time that they needed it to be up and running in Georgia. And the folks in Oconee and Athens, Clark County, that lost that project, they're dealing with that now. Companies more and more and more are looking at they're looking at our dropout rates. It used to be they just want to talk about quick start, which is great, but now they're actually going back a little bit further, and so we've struggled with that. But small businesses in particular are having a very difficult time with getting the talented and the skilled workforce that they need. Small businesses tell us, as far as taxes and incentives go, that we need more incubators in Georgia. We need more business accelerators for them to go into. They need help with renovating their buildings. They've talked about incentives there. One thing that they talk a lot about is there a way to incentivize large Georgia companies to actually use more Georgia small businesses in their supplier network? And I don't know how we get into that, but that comes up on a lot of surveys. Market research is a program we're rolling out. Won't bother you with the details of that today. Small businesses do give us a lot of heartache and talk to us a lot about the difficulty of competing against larger businesses and trying to get state procurement contracts. They talk to us about workers' comp, the need for high-speed internet access, and just, as we all do, we talk about compliance. And, I think the big piece here you addressed in the last session was aligning up some of our tax code with the federal tax code, and I'll leave any discussion of that up to DOR. But again, continuing to try to reduce the red tape. We hear that from small businesses. Of course, we hear that from larger companies as well. Making that transition from what small businesses are saying to what we talk to large companies about, the part of my job that I enjoy the most is that part of closing the deal. I go in at the end, close the deals. Our team works with these companies from the beginning to end. We've got business development teams that go out and get the leads. We have teams that show them Georgia. We have regional teams that work with the communities. We kind of focus on 3 key parts when we talk to these companies. We talk about the pro-business climate. More and more and more and more, this is what the lead is when we talk to a company. When you guys passed the single-factor sales tax bill, we had about 3 companies that had cut Georgia that came back to us to say, wait a minute, I think we want to reconsider now. And that's been a huge marketing tool for us. Infrastructure, there's not a big project that we work that we don't have to talk to them about building roads, somehow helping the community pay for road work, and we've got a couple of projects that do that. Rail, we have more rail projects now than we've ever had before because of the price of gas. That's difficult too. How do we help a company or a community put in a rail spur? Water and sewer, you'd be surprised at the number of projects we work that we have to help run water and sewer. We have to incentivize, help the community get water and sewer out to the site. And the same thing with telecommunications, and particularly in the rural part of Georgia. I said this yesterday at the Celebrating Rural Georgia conference. No matter what incentives we have, no matter what workforce we have, if communities and the state doesn't have the right leadership, we get cut right away. And we appreciate the support of the General Assembly and obviously of the administration having that pro-business climate and working with us. And more local communities understand that. And I think if you look at that list of the top 10 deals this year, you'll see probably the top 10 communities that got their act together and that know how to do economic development. Obviously, we don't get anywhere without workforce, as we referred to a minute ago with Novartis. Just to kind of frame it up for you, they were concerned in that situation about our high dropout rate, but at the end of the day, they wanted employees that could go into biomanufacturing. Well, North Carolina graduates 800 students a year. We graduated 21. Little gap there. North Carolina has developed a program where they look at what their industry needs and they use their community colleges to actually graduate students in very specific fields, almost like we used to do when you signed up and you went through school and you knew the area that you were going to go into. In North Carolina, if you even have an inkling that you want to go into biosciences, in high school you can get credit, you can get dual credit programs, and you can get kind of an advanced science emphasis and then go into one of these programs. More and more of the projects we work, of the companies we talk to, start the conversation with, can we get the workforce? Quite honestly, Kia's whole conversation with us started with, we don't believe that we can get the workforce that we need in Mississippi. We think that we can get it in Georgia. Can you give it to us? And once we convinced them of that, then the easy part started. Then we just had to negotiate and go down the road and find the site. We work very closely with Quick Start. Mike Grumman's here today. We've said it 100 times, that's probably Georgia's #1 incentive. It's Quick Start training. I doubt there are very few projects, Mike, that we work or that we land that Quick Start is not involved in as a key component. ICAP, similar type of program through the university system, is very important to us. And more, too, we're leveraging our research universities with GRA, Georgia Research Alliance, and others. We announced recently Samsung moved their North American R&D Center from out on the West Coast actually to the campus of Georgia Tech because of the research that was going on there. Pirelli is a great Italian company. Everybody thinks of Pirelli tires. Pirelli is also one of the largest telecom providers in all of Europe. They have relocated their R&D headquarters for telecom to the Georgia Tech campus because of that kind of strength. So that's a whole new component of economic development for us and a whole new group of assets that we have to learn how to leverage and work with. And then really, at the end of the day, to close out the deal, we get into incentives. Two types of incentives, statutory and discretionary. Statutory, everybody qualifies for that meets certain requirements. And I'll just walk through some of the most popular ones and the ones that we use a lot. The Job Tax Credit Program is part of a tiered program in Georgia. Depending upon your poverty rate, your unemployment rate in Georgia, you're classified every year into one of 4 categories. The more rural communities, the poorer communities in Georgia have larger amounts of job tax credits that they can offer per job created, and the threshold is lower. When you get into a community like Fayette County, where I ran the development authority, it becomes very difficult. You're dealing with a very small amount of job tax credits, but a very large number of qualifying jobs you have to create in order to qualify for those job tax credits. How important are they? We get a lot of complaints about the fact that they can only take them against their taxes. They like to take them against payroll taxes and withholding taxes, and I'll mention that in just a moment. We do have, and y'all passed 2 years ago, the existing industry tax credit bonus. This has been just a great thing for Georgia businesses. For so long, we heard from existing companies in Georgia that here we are, we're paying taxes, we're creating 80% of all the new jobs, we're generating over 50% of the new project announcements every year, but yet a new company coming to Georgia has access to all these incentives that we don't have. But what we've done is we've done a better job of educating existing industry in Georgia that if you meet the thresholds, if you work with us, you can qualify for the same incentives that new companies qualify for. But then when y'all passed this existing industry tax credit, it gave us another tool to go to them and say, you know what, we actually value you more than a new company. On top of what you'll qualify for, we're going to give you a $500 per job bonus on top of that. That's been, just like I said, a great tool for us to use. We dealt with a company the other day. It was a new company that was looking at Georgia. And their whole point to us was, in the state we're in now, the state doesn't want to help us. We need to grow. We need more room. We want to look at another state. That's why we're here. But more importantly, once we're here, how are you going to treat us? And we were able to describe to them this program and others that we have, and that, you know, existing companies that are expanding qualify for Quick Start. They qualify for discretionary incentives as well. It got us down the field. I think we're probably on 4th and 1 now with them, and we feel very confident about getting that company. But their whole attitude to Georgia changed when they found out how we now treat and how we work with existing industry. Some companies might be heavy investment, like Hewlett-Packard in Atlanta this year. Very few jobs. In that situation, they might choose to take the investment tax credit. Again, that's based on where they locate. There's different percentages. Headquarter tax credits, we work with a lot of headquarters projects. We want to work with more. Hans Gaunt, Bob Simmons are here. We work a lot of projects with them in the metro Atlanta area. And we'll come back to headquarters credit in a minute. More and more of these technology companies that we deal with need R&D credits. Retraining credits, those are credits if you're taking a workforce and retooling and you're going to retrain your workers. That's a good program for us. And then also, if you're going to use the ports down in Savannah, there's the port tax credit as well. And in some cases, there are sales tax exemptions, mainly if you're building a large manufacturing plant in Georgia, or you're the primary material handling for pollution control equipment, you can get sales tax exemption on the equipment that you're purchasing. We've talked, I think, a lot about the training programs that we offer. When we put together a package, we use all those statutory incentives. We work with the community, and we take the company down this path. And then, once the company has decided on one community in Georgia, they've eliminated all the other communities, it's down to a community in Georgia versus a community in another state, then we use the discretionary incentives that we have. And I'll take a minute to walk you through these, Mr. Chairman. The largest pot of money that we have to draw from is the One Georgia Edge Fund. That's a $25 million pot of money that we use to close deals in rural Georgia. We cannot use those funds to close deals anywhere in the metro Atlanta area, and in the larger kind of second-tier cities like Macon, Savannah, Columbus, Augusta. If we want to use that $25 million fund, the project has to be large enough that it is considered to have a regional impact. And we generally use a 200 job minimum as regional impact and a fairly high average wage. We've had that EDGE program now for the last few years. It's been very effective. It's been the key point in us in closing a lot of deals. The sister kind of companion package to that is the One Georgia Equity Grant or Loan Program. That's a little less driven by competition, but it's what communities can use to finance infrastructure for projects. Maybe they need to build a new industrial park. Maybe they need to build a new spec building. Maybe they need to run water and sewer to a new company. They can apply and go through the process. Last year we had $15 million in equity. We've reduced that amount a little bit because of the rollover that we've had. Equity, we've been able to use it recently also, and again, this is just for rural Georgia, but we have been able to use it in a couple of situations where there was a threat of a Georgia company moving out of the state of Georgia to another location. We've been able to use some of the jobs that we would retain along with new jobs that they would create in order to help them qualify for the equity program. The One Georgia Strategic Industries Loan Fund is a $10 million, again, One Georgia program. We started it last year. We've had no companies go through it yet, but it basically allows us to do as little as a 0% loan for a company that's in one of our strategic industries. They're generally high-tech companies. We've made a lot of offers. We've not closed any of the deals with those funds out there, but we feel very good. In the end, this program will be tied very closely with our Centers of Innovation program, and the companies that are growing out of Georgia research universities will be able to tap into this fund. And then we discussed with you before the Small Business Loan Guarantee Fund. Now, what if you're not in one of those rural communities in Georgia, and we got a big deal to close? We have a fund called REBA, and we've changed what those initials stand for about every couple of years, so forgive me for not going into that, but essentially it's our deal closing fund for Metro Atlanta. We have a little more flexibility with it. We could use it outside in rural Georgia if we needed to, but since we have the One Georgia pot there, we usually don't. But REBA has really been the victim of a lot of budget cuts back over the last 7 years. At one point, we had probably $12 to $15 million, Charlie, in that fund. It was reduced. 2 years ago, we were down to only $3 million to close all the deals in Atlanta. I know Hans is going to talk after lunch today, and he'll address that a little bit more. This year, y'all helped us. Y'all increased that fund back up to $5 million, and that's great, and we appreciate it. But with all the deals that we are doing in Atlanta, it makes it very difficult for us to close out those deals. What kind of companies are we using for? For example, Chiquita was a company I think everybody knows about Chiquita. It was in every newspaper in the Western Hemisphere. We used Reba in that situation to try to close that deal. We were able to use Reba for the Hewlett-Packard deal that we talked about a moment ago. And then lastly, as far as our discretionary incentives, we have a $3 million pot of what we call the Life Science Facilities Loan Fund. What we find is we work with life science companies. They're growing out of Georgia's business incubators. They're growing out of the universities. What was happening was they were getting to the point where they needed to leave the incubators. They needed to find lab space to conduct their trials. And our friends up in North Carolina were swooping in with some pots of money and some lab space and taking these companies out of Georgia, taking them to North Carolina, setting them up where they've grown. So y'all helped us a couple of years ago, put $2 million into this pool. And what we've been able to do, we've done 2 deals in the last 2 years. This is very, I think, entrepreneurial of state government. We've developed a way where we can help underwrite a builder by giving them a loan, a low-interest loan, that's going to build this lab space for these companies. And in return, not only do they pay the loan back to the state, but we're able to take stock and warrants in the company. So if the company succeeds and wins, then the people of Georgia succeed and win. If they fail, we've taken a chance with the company that we've invested in, and we fail. This has been great. The goal here is at some point, after several years of hopefully your support and continuing to seed this fund, that we'll start cashing in those warrants and the stocks. The first deal has already almost paid back all of their loan. We've got a lot of stock in that company now that we're holding on to. But hopefully we'll have a very robust fund that will be able to compete against the likes of North Carolina as we go forward in the future. Those are the main incentives that we use. There are other smaller ones that you might hear about today, but those are kind of the marquee ones that we use. Some of them are a little harder to use, and this is our last slide here. If you're in one of the rural, the poorest bottom 40 poor communities in Georgia, and you're creating a certain number of jobs, you can actually take those tax credits against your payroll withholding. This is something that several states do, including our friends in South Carolina. In those other counties in Georgia, you're unable to do that. We have more and more companies now asking us and telling us that in other states there are sales tax exemption on energy purchases. And obviously with the high price of energy today, for our large manufacturers, this has become a very large issue for them. In Alabama, they can actually have sales tax exemptions against construction materials when they're building a new plant. In Georgia, we've done construction sales tax exemptions, but only for nonprofit companies. Nonprofit entities like the aquarium and symphony halls. Headquarters tax credits. Again, this was an issue that we dealt with Chiquita, in that right now the way that the headquarters tax credit works, and we've tweaked it a lot over the years, all the jobs don't qualify. So if you have your headquarters here, but maybe you have a regional sales office or you have a data center, those other jobs don't qualify for those headquarters taxes. And they also don't qualify if you maybe wanted to open a regional sales office in rural Georgia and other places. They would not qualify currently with headquarters tax credit. So that's an area where we continue to work on and try to determine ways to improve that. I know it's something that Hans and the Metro Chamber has worked a lot on and really has a lot invested in. Beyond that, it gets very difficult. If you're going to open a call center in Georgia, there are some tax credits that you qualify for. But what we don't have, and a lot of states are now implementing, are white or what they call pink collar tax credit programs. If you're doing manufacturing in Georgia, you can qualify for tax credits. And then if you're doing a headquarters project, you qualify for those. But in many cases, if it's maybe you're going to locate an architectural firm office here, you wouldn't qualify. We had a situation recently where we were working with a large project that they really were going to basically open an engineering satellite office here. It would have employed somewhere in the neighborhood of 700 engineers. Those pay pretty good. We couldn't work it out so that they qualified for those credits. The R&D credits are rarely used. I think maybe Ed could speak better to this than I could. We've got a couple of companies in Georgia now that are using the R&D credits. When we lost Novartis, we had a heart-to-heart debrief with the consultants and the company. They mentioned the fact that they really couldn't, they wouldn't have been able to use our R&D tax credit program. It really wasn't built for them. And I asked them, I said, well, which states out there have a good R&D tax credit program? This is an area, as we grow Georgia's economy, we know we're going to grow it from an intellectual point of view. This is going to be more and more important. They said really, with the exception of maybe New Jersey, North Carolina, and Michigan, there really aren't any states doing anything unique with their R&D credit. And they said the door is really open for a state to make a name for itself and to really get some activity if we could develop a really unique type of R&D credit. Number 7 on our list, obviously, we talked to a lot of companies about how can you help us just keep our doors open, and while we can on occasion use the equity program I mentioned to you earlier, there's really nothing that we can do for a company that's looking at closing a plant in Georgia and moving those jobs to China or anywhere else for that matter. The way our incentives are built and the way our discretionary incentives are built is that you really need to invest new money into Georgia. You need to create new jobs in Georgia in order to qualify for any of these programs. So if all you're trying to do is keep the doors open, there's really not a lot that we can do. We work with Quick Start and others on can we help with retraining. We work with communities. Are there programs you can do locally? And I think as you go through your committee meeting, that would be a very interesting conversation to have with some local communities that have lost some plants. Were there things that were identified that if we had done differently might have helped keep that company in Georgia? And then obviously, we need more funds in REBA. Business incentives, we can talk about the statutory incentives all day, but if we don't have the dollars to close the deals, then we're going to be out of the game. The last one, and I didn't put it on this slide, more and more now we are dealing with, for lack of a better word, tourism, product development. Maybe it's a new resort looking at coming to Georgia. Maybe it's a theme park that wants to open in Georgia. And while they might qualify for some of our tax credits, we really don't have a good program, a good incentive that we can go out there and sit down with hotel chains, with resort companies, and talk to them really strongly about, here's what we do for your type of project. We kind of have to go back and figure ways to make it work for companies. And right now we've probably got 3 major resort projects that we're working with. We're trying to figure out how to use the tools that we've got. It's very difficult. And I know that Cullen Larson will mention some ideas when he talks a little bit later this morning about GEDA and their tourism committee and what they've looked at. But I'd also encourage you to look strongly at that. That's kind of the overview that we wanted to give you this morning, Mr. Chairman. I'll be happy to try to answer questions. Charlie Gatlin, our Chief of Staff, is here too, and a lot of other people in the audience that might be able to answer any questions that I can't answer for you.
We certainly appreciate that presentation. Before I get to our committee members to ask questions, let me just make an announcement. That vibration you feel, nothing to worry about. We're running heavy equipment around here all the time, but sometimes this vibration the building's designed with that in mind. Nothing to worry about. Thank you again. Representative Martin, I think you have some questions. We'll start with you.
I was going to ask you about the vibration. No.
I'm going to pass this microphone to you.
Before I questions of the speaker or Chris, and then earlier on you talked about skilled workforce. Do we have representatives from the university system or DTAE here?
Mike Grummins from DTAE is here.
Is anybody from the university system? Sure. I think as we go forward, we may need to make sure the university system of Georgia is involved in that. They get a lot of tax dollars to build folks they'll build business in Georgia, and I think it would be advantageous to all the people that pay to build in Georgia to have their attendance at the meeting. I'm sure that it was just another side thing whenever we get somebody here today. If I may follow up, you mentioned the Georgia tax code and the federal tax code, and that was talking about it at Chairman O'Neill's last meeting on the comprehensive tax review. And I guess I mentioned that you mentioned that to ask this. It seems like one of the things that we could do is make it easier to start a business in Georgia. I mean, we heard the testimony at the last meeting about one particular business who didn't file a sales and use tax return for a number of years, so they're just too honest. Do you get any details at how we compare as far as ease of startup and small businesses versus the states that we compete with? And small businesses don't come to you to locate here. They just decided that folks are going to get in that business and drive our economy. Do you have any information on that you could get for us today or in the future?
I think we can get it for you in the future. We've just engaged with the Lowe Foundation to do a survey of how we can rate with small business startup and other components, just exactly as you asked. And I'll find out when that survey and that is going to be ready, and we'll bring that back to the committee. But we do have a lot of companies that our regional staff works with that want to start a business, or maybe they're coming out of our incubators. And one thing that's been identified where they really need help is on market research. They don't have the big research departments, the big marketing departments. So we do have a program that we're working with the University of Georgia Small Business Development Center. We'll roll it out a little bit later this year to actually a place for Georgia small businesses to go to get some of the same type of business intelligence that the larger businesses can kind of do on their own. And we've also, our department at www.georgia.org does have kind of an overview of all the state resources that a small business might need. The problem is we're having a hard time making it really user-friendly. As you can imagine, there's a whole lot of state resources out there, and so we're looking at other states now that have a better system. North Carolina has a good one that we're looking at. So does New Mexico. I can go into one website and do everything I need to do to get my business up and running. Really a user-friendly, easy-to-use online program, and we're looking at different programs right now.
Mr. Clark, going back to the workforce issue again, does your department have any interaction with the university system and specifically with the technical colleges on an ongoing basis? And talk to me a little bit about that.
Thank you, Representative. That's a great question. We have a lot of allies to get the job done, whether it's the utilities, universities, other state agencies, but really we rely on particularly DTAE. Our regional staff in many places in Georgia are co-located at the local technical colleges. We've done that in the last 6 months. We've taken them out of their own kind of set-aside space, put them in over with the technical college. Mike, I could probably tell you all day, take him all day to count all the projects he and his team has worked on. They are hand in hand with us. They are usually they're in the first meetings that we have with the company. At the very latest, they're in the second meeting that we have. They go with us anywhere in the world to talk to companies. It's an incredible asset that we have, particularly with Quick Start. The universities, we are finding that we're working with them more and more and more. The program, ICAP program, was set up to try to work like Quick Start. We haven't had a lot of projects use ICAP, but what we've been able to do is now we understand better the resources at the universities, and we're able to bring them in. It's a little different culture, as y'all well know, and so we tend to work more closely with the chancellor and his immediate staff than we do with the different universities, but it's a relationship that we're working on every day. And it's very, very important. When we worked with Novartis, the relationship with Athens Tech and the relationship with the University of Georgia were the two key parts as we went through that whole process. And as we deal with more life science projects, more of these strategic industry high-tech projects, if the research is not being done in Georgia at our universities, we're not even going to get a look at these companies. And 44 of the announcements that we did this year we considered to be high-tech that had some type of relationship or wanted a relationship with one of our universities. Another example is a company called Carbon Motors y'all might have read about. Kia kind of took the checkered flag, so to speak, but Carbon is a startup car company started by former Ford execs. They were looking at us in South Carolina to get this started. And what they do is they plan to build a Homeland Security public safety vehicles that are specifically built for that purpose. Instead of taking a Crown Vic and retrofitting it, it's built from the ground up for this. It's a very innovative plan. Great guys from Ford. We were able to win that project to Georgia because of the different programs at Georgia Tech. And they're actually now located at a Georgia Tech incubator. They're working with professors on a variety of issues over there on the campus. And they're also now working with Southern Poly as well. So it's a key asset for us, and it gets more important every day.
Any other questions? If you don't mind, I just want to, then
Yes, sir.
elementary type questions, or at least the LMI part. On one page or one slide of the presentation, there's the page on major announcements that you mentioned.
Yes, sir.
I'm looking through the job column and investment column. Is there any relationship between the number of jobs created and the investment that comes within there, or is that just the way it happens?
Well, I mean, if you look at a situation like Rheem, Rheem had 700 jobs that created in a fairly low investment for that many jobs. They already had a manufacturing plant that they had already invested in, so it was really, I don't know if you can call it $25 million, minor. But in the context of things, it was just minor what they needed to do on site. But on the other hand, you look at Hewlett-Packard, they're going to invest $800 million into the state of Georgia for these high-tech centers. But they're only going to employ 280 people, 140 to run each center. Generally, though, if you're talking heavy manufacturing, the more jobs, the higher the investment. It really is dependent upon, Mr. Chairman, the type of project that we're working with.
Page following that, you mentioned other tax incentives, but credit and sponsorship of SE incubator creation. Would you go into a little more detail on that information if you could?
What?
Explain that to you.
I'll try. I might have to bring somebody else in to talk about it. What we found is several small businesses have come to us and said that in other states, and we're still trying to do some research here, that companies that are opening up their own business incubators, in Georgia, most of the incubators we have are publicly owned. They're with a technical college, or they're through Georgia Tech or the University of Georgia, and we work very closely with those companies. We want to keep them here after we've invested in them. But once they leave there, where do they go? They go into something called an accelerator. Those are usually private in other states. Well, in Georgia, we really don't have any tax credits. We don't have any programs to encourage the creation of those. We don't do a good job of encouraging private companies, private investors to build their own incubators. This really gets back, I think, to, I might be able to frame it up a little bit better by talking about really venture capital. You want somewhere for these companies to go. This gets to that same point. Georgia is really way behind in venture capital. Is there ways for us to incent companies to invest in Georgia companies or incent financial institutes? Do you give a tax credit for a venture company that invests in a Georgia company? Is that an option? So those are the types of things that we're working with and struggling with. But credit for the sponsorship, do I build my own incubator? What if I invest in companies that are in Georgia incubators?
One last question, and just to put the other on those, I want to get all of your opinions on this next question. It's just going to have to be reversed. In the section of 05, we definitely issued, it became a very controversial issue, I think it was House Bill 218, confidentiality negotiations. That caused a lot of heartburn to a lot of policymakers. Could you just quickly go over and explain how critical that is or is not when we try to negotiate with companies located here, especially one other state maybe?
Sure. And I can give you a couple of examples. It's very important for us. Right now, we're not on an equal playing field. The media can make a request of us, and we'll have to turn over every document. There was an article last week about a deal in Florida where they had an open records request, and the governor said, Governor Bush was able to say, sorry, we're in the middle of negotiations. When we get to the point where we are making decisions on incentives that are not already allocated for this purpose, then of course it's going to be public, and everything's open afterwards. But while we're dealing with it, y'all are all businessmen. You know that you don't want your competitors to know what you're doing. And a lot of times that's what we're dealing with here. So our ability to negotiate with companies in a confidential manner, if they request of us that confidentiality, is extraordinarily important. Throughout the Kia deal, that was all over every headline all around the world. And it wasn't so much that the Georgia press, I don't think in that situation hardly ever asked us for information. But we were hit every day with open records requests from Texas, Alabama, and Mississippi, who were all going for that project just like we were. Almost every day we had an open records request from another state. And it was very difficult for us. What we ended up doing, and what we do a lot of times, is we have project code names. At the end, I think we changed the Kia project code name about 5 times, and we're sitting there scratching our head at the end one day going, what are we going to do? Because, here comes another open records request from another state tomorrow. And I don't mind telling you, we said, well, all of our code names are named. What if we have a code number? Maybe that'll throw them off a little bit. And so we used my recently born son's due date as the project, and the Koreans thought that was good luck, and it boded well for us at the end of the day. But we literally, every week, we were changing that code name. Chiquita is another example, and Hans worked very closely with us. Again, it wasn't a Georgia media outlet that spilled the beans, but it was actually in Cincinnati. The local paper found out. They did an open request, not just of the department, but of the city of Atlanta and others, while we were, in negotiations. And Chiquita told us up front, we want to do this as quietly as possible because we have a lot invested, we have a lot riding on this, we have a lot of competitors, and we want to at least make the site selection process to go through that to narrow it down. And we need to do that in quiet, and that didn't happen because as soon as the Cincinnati media did their first report on it, and then it was a ripple effect. And again, very little open records requests from Georgia media, but we were up against Miami in that situation as well as Cincinnati. In Miami, we had reporters from Miami calling us every day, asking us for open records. And so when we talk about trying to protect those records, it's not that anything that we do, we want to be as transparent as we possibly can. But for example, in the case of Reba, y'all allocate a certain amount of money for us to close deals with. In the case of Kia, when we had to make other decisions, those were all public records. Those were all public meetings that we had to have in order to allocate those funds. Georgia law, makes us go through the right hoops. It's just right now we're very vulnerable. Can we say specifically that we lost a big project because of open record? We feel it was a key part of Chiquita. But again, a lot of these companies don't bother to tell us when they just give us a call and say, you've been cut. And that's what we deal with. Florida doesn't have to do it. Alabama, nobody we compete against has to do what we do.
Follow up on that, Chris. I think people keep asking, can you name a project was lost of those records? I would counter that to say that we don't know the ones that were never on the list to compete for.
That's right.
There are some companies that don't, if they're relocating, they will not take the chance.
That's right.
It becomes incumbent before they decide if they are going to relocate. Follow up, I guess, back on a slide,
yes, sir.
Number 7, several pages back, you have the retention of business. And I want to bring that up in conjunction with the major announcements for 06. Many of those were expansions.
Absolutely right.
I think we're all concerned and we want to work on that, how we can incentivize people to expand in Georgia and help those businesses in Georgia to stay in Georgia and thrive in Georgia. We're all after new business in that state because people have been in the state for years and years that have helped Georgia get where it is today. And I would like personally to ask for more detail as we move forward in the chairman sets his agenda, how and what we can do to help businesses stay in the community. And I'll follow up that with this and ask if you got a further comment. Somewhere on one of these slides, you talk about tax relief on energy. I'm told that we're a little bit behind on tax relief on energy in states that competing with, and I'll pull that right into retention. If we don't do something about that, I feel like we're going to lose some of our manufacturing facilities and lose the jobs and the payroll and the community to go with that. So if you have additional information that the chairman would allow in a future meeting, I would like to know how that specific, looking at that tax, reducing that tax burden would that would potentially help us retain business and losing those jobs.
Yes, sir. And I'll just comment, too, back. I appreciate your comments on existing industry. Just a couple of statistics for you. 91% of the projects that we announced this year in rural Georgia, 91% were expansions of Georgia companies. And that really speaks to the whole crux of it. We don't take care of our own, and that's the mission and the philosophy that we've had and that the governor's made sure that we've had since we've been doing this. But we'll definitely work with you and follow up with more information on the energy piece as we go forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Industry groups, manufacturing in particular around Georgia, as well as energy conversations. We want to have those conversations until we have something accomplished. Moving right along, next, we're going to hear a presentation from GEDA, the Georgia Economic Development Association. Thank you, West Point, and we appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Cullen Larson. I'm Executive Director of the Georgia Economic Developers Association, and we appreciate the opportunity to participate today and the generous allocation of the time on the agenda, which, depending on the questions, we may not use all of that allocated time, but we don't have a PowerPoint. I'm pleased to have it at the background because we are obviously working closely with the Department of Economic Development. And I think it's fair to say that we would certainly support all of that you have heard from Chris Clark on behalf of the department. We're fortunate to have Chris as a member of the GEDA board, and we work very closely with the department, even though the association is a private, nonprofit, and separate association. Let me tell you just briefly so that everyone understands who we are and what our members do. They do a great variety of jobs related to economic development. We have about 900 members statewide. About half are in Metro Atlanta, and the other half are distributed fairly evenly around the state. These are people who work in the public sector and the private sector, people who work at the local level, regionally, and at the state level. So it's very diverse, although we really focus on those who work projects and those who, at the local level, particularly development authority executives, chambers of commerce, which have economic development functions, and their counterparts at the state level with whom they work. So the partners and the allies that Chris referenced really find a forum for networking and for relating to one another and sharing ideas and information within GEDA. The presentation from the department provides an excellent background for you. You'll hear some of the same ideas in what I will share with you this morning. The letter that you have before you is the product of a process that our President Jim Finch initiated in anticipation of the work of this committee by drawing from a variety of members of GEDA, pulling them together into an incentives work group, listening to what our members had told us and the experience that they have. Not every idea has made it into that list. These are judged to be of particular importance. They're not listed in a particular priority because they really are all important. We will mention them, we'll outline them briefly this morning, and then based on the committee's interest for further details and information, GEDA can provide you with the proper expert and experience to provide you further information. These are this list of areas that we would encourage you to address include both discretionary and statutory incentives, which I think is a useful categorization of these tools that, as Chris mentioned in his presentation. These, I think it's important to say, also assume that the state continues adequate support for the key agencies, their funding, and for the key programs such as Quick Start, ICAP, the workforce development area. they're not on this list, they're assumed, they're basic, they're essential, without which we cannot go forward. So these are ideas for improvement. Some of these will be of a legislative nature, and some will be perhaps possible to be addressed through the policy decisions that agencies may make with the support of the General Assembly. First of all, our members have continued to tell us that the value of the job tax credit under the BEST program needs to be strengthened. It needs to be strengthened so that it actually has cash value to the companies that would qualify to take the credit but have no tax liability under Georgia corporate income tax law at this point. And so an incentive cannot incent unless it has a value. We think that our competitiveness for both recruitment and retention will be strengthened if the qualified business could apply the BEST job tax credit toward either its income tax liability, if it has some, or to the employer's payroll tax liability. Secondly, and this is in the area of the discretionary incentives, it is essential that in order for Georgia to close the deals, that the deal closing funds be supported adequately. We certainly encourage the General Assembly to increase the appropriation level for the REBA program and to make sure that the One Georgia Edge program remains strong in consideration of increasing it as well. Communities, and we try to stay in close touch with the counties and cities of Georgia through a joint work group that we have with ACCG and GMA. Communities struggle in some cases to keep up with growth, in others to provide the infrastructure that can support it and allow them to compete. So to adequately assist communities with the development of infrastructure, the One Georgia Equity Program should be increased, and the cap on the maximum amount of an equity program award for an eligible project should be increased, our members believe. Chris mentioned the One Georgia Entrepreneur and Small Business Development Loan Program. That is another one that provides a tool for communities that to still do effective economic development. Not every strategy will work in every community. Certainly communities want to retain the businesses they have. They may not be able to compete effectively for a variety of reasons, very often to attract new large companies, but can grow their own. And the Small Business Development Loan Guarantee Program is one important tool for that. Our members are also highlighting the need to expand the Life Science Facilities Fund beyond the current budget of, I believe, $3 million that Chris mentioned, and also consider allowing that fund to be used to support a broader range, an expanded range of innovative and high technology projects. Research and development tax credits were also mentioned earlier. Again, for a credit to be an incentive, it has to incent and it has to have value. Our members are suggesting that the R&D tax credit provision should allow for the sale of credits to other Georgia companies. Georgia manufacturers would be chief among those if we needed to restrict it to a particular category. But allowing the sale would provide, in effect, some market value to those credits that would have no value if a company that had become eligible for them had nothing against which to take the credit. I think that concepts such as a minimum value requirement for such sales would be a useful provision, and that credit should be applicable toward either the income tax liability or the payroll tax liability. Another idea that our members have put forward is to, and it parallels some of the ideas that you heard from Chris, restructuring the headquarters tax credit to develop a white-collar job tax credit by removing the word corporate from the definition, by allowing the credit in the case of regional and divisional operations as well as back office projects, again allowing for the sale of those credits and the application to the income tax liability, if any, and the payroll tax liability of the employer as an option. It was mentioned earlier that I might have something to say about tourism. Tourism is another very viable strategy for economic development in many of our communities, perhaps all of them to some degree. And many steps forward have been taken by Georgia with the leadership of the Department of Economic Development and the strong support of our local communities, particularly in the attraction of visitors. But there's a missing element that the state and locals have attempted to work on, but we need another tool, and that is in the area of tourism product development. The facilities that can attract, the assets like resorts and attractions of various kinds. Kentucky has something that was brought to our attention that Georgia may want to explore further. And I believe at a later meeting of this committee, you will hear perhaps more from the Tourism Development Alliance and others about this. But very briefly, the Kentucky Tourism Development Act provides that if a tourism product development project has an investment of more than $1 million, they would allow recovery of a quarter of that, up to a quarter of that, over a period of 10 years, via a state sales tax credit, state sales tax rebate. They define what businesses are eligible, and in their case have excluded retail and small lodging from that provision. I emphasize state sales tax rebate as distinguished from local because, quite frankly, local economic developers rely on the support, in many cases, of local cities and counties for an economic development budget or for the development of local infrastructure related to economic development. So there are concerns among many of our members that impact on on local sales tax receipt be one that should be minimized. There's also been discussion, as you know, of the phase out or perhaps gradual elimination of the state corporate income tax. A thought that our members have put forward with regard to that is, if that should occur, there needs to be a concurrent redesign of Georgia's economic development incentives, which is so largely based on that corporate income tax. And this is not an argument against that phase out. It's just simply a recognition that without that our current structure is tied to it, and we need to be thinking about what our incentives can be if it were to be phased out. And of course, that is directly related to the purpose of your study committee. Another principle that our members believe, and I won't venture to say that every member believes this, but the majority of our members do believe in the targeting of our incentives toward qualified projects that locate or expand in certain defined, underdeveloped geographic regions of Georgia. It's not to say that the current tier structure or other means of targeting cannot be improved, but there is general support for that principle that targeting our incentives toward underdeveloped areas, both rural and urban such areas, is important. Finally, on our list of topics that were put forward by our incentives work group and supported by our board, are green building incentives, incent the construction of of environmentally sustainable, according to sustainable standards and systems, or the LEEDS system. I think that should be considered as well. As I said, these are topics that we suggest the committee explore further. There may be one or two that catch your eye, that spark your interest, that you'd like further information about, and we'll be happy to provide that to you to the extent we can today. And, just glancing around the audience, Mr. Chairman, there's a large number of GEDA members present in the room. They represent a variety of communities and organizations. Depending on the questions, I may call on one of them. But I welcome your questions at this time.
We certainly appreciate that presentation, this information sheet you have given us here. So we'll start with some questions or comments from the committee members who want to kick us off.
I guess I would go back to page 2 and sort of, of course, you highlight the Kentucky Tourism Development Act, but and there may be somebody in the room who can answer this, but you don't. But tourism is a big industry in Georgia, and it's kind of one of those things that the average Georgian doesn't see. It's like you don't appreciate your own neighborhood because you live there all the time. And can you tell us a little more about the return on investment for dollars in the tourism industry? We've heard those things before. If you give the committee and the audience, there's some people in the audience that may not be in the tourism business, now bringing those kind of dollars into the state really can help other pieces of business in the state.
Well, I want to get you the best answer possible, and that would not be mine. I want to see if I could ask Joy to comment on that for us.
Would you mind coming up here, please? Thank you.
Mrs. Joy Wallstrom with the Tourism Development Alliance.
Thanks, Colin. I don't have the economic impact numbers in front of me, and we will make a full presentation on the Kentucky model as well as the economic impact of tourism at a later meeting, if it pleases the chairman. But it is over $16 billion. The return on investment in the first 90 days is $7.74, according to the research that's been done by Georgia Tech, Georgia State, as well as some outside consulting firms at the request of the Commission for New Georgia. And obviously the big thing with tourism is that they spend their money and we don't have to raise their children, provide health care, and those kinds of things. The two biggest challenges for the tourism development, the hotels and the resort folks that Chris Clark referenced earlier, is that a tourism investment takes a lot longer to pay off. Reynolds Plantation is a great example. Sea Island is a great example. That they're looking 10, 20, 30 years out. And especially on the resort destination side, it's more of a legacy building business. The other big thing is that there's a lot of part-time job employees. Wild Adventures in Valdosta, 60% of their employees are part-time, and it's kids, college students, second incomes for families, and those kinds of things. So I will have my finance experts testify at a later date, but that kind of gives you guys. Does that answer your question, Chuck? Okay. Is that good? Okay.
More about tourism on that. This may relate more to large attractions, such as a Six Flags or something larger. But have you run across any issues with these companies that want to locate here that has to do with our liability issues or tort issues in this state? Has that been a big factor for some of these large attractions?
Not really the work that you have to do for the
I guess this question goes to the point, some of the points on the first page of the handout, it talks about maintaining dollars and converting to lifetime society facilities more adequate money, really and so forth. Of course, as we get to the appropriations process, there's always a competition for dollars. Can you address, there's always a question of if we do this, we get this. Tell us about this. What if we don't do some of these things? I guess I want to look at the dark side of some of these things. If we fail to address some of these things, there are hidden costs in the state of Georgia where it actually will cost us more than funding some of these projects or possible programs. Is that not true? That if we don't allocate more funding to keep these businesses or attract other business, we ultimately have more money coming out of the budget for other things down the road. Is that not true?
I think that's true. There's an opportunity cost, I guess you would say, if in fact we choose to increase the appropriation for REBA, which I would guess would be our first priority, and not do life sciences. We will have some opportunity cost. May not be able to measure it exactly, but we'll have an opportunity cost for not being able to perhaps compete as effectively for that type of project.
And let me clear that up. The competition for dollars across the entire budget is always a tough one. I'm not suggesting that we choose one of the points.
Okay.
And really, mine was more of a, I guess, leading question that if we can find the right balance to increase each of these funds, money's available at the right proportion. If we fail to do that, the lost opportunity across those funds is something that we never have a chance to do again. We lose the business, we lose manufacturing in the state of Georgia for not funding some of these next year.
I think
we lose things. It's a lot harder to go out and catch another one than it is to retain one if we can find the money in the budget now.
Yes, that's exactly true, and I think you could approach the statistics that Chris presented backwards and say, okay, take those 31 projects that required incentives to secure, many of them expansions. What if that those programs were not in place to provide those required incentives? And you could run down those columns and add up the numbers of jobs and the numbers of dollars that would not have been announced, would not have been provided to people.
On point 3 of your handout,
Yes, sir.
the One Georgia Equity Program
Right.
talks about economic development and infrastructure for economic development. Do you know if this program is limited to any specific type of infrastructure, or that any and all infrastructure that accommodates it?
My understanding is that it is fairly flexible in terms of the types of projects and infrastructure that can be funded, but it does have to be there has to be a demonstrated economic development impact with each project, so that they're awarded competitively based on certain points. This is an example of a recommendation that may be possible to address within the policy setting of the One Georgia Authority itself without need of legislation beyond what's already in the statute. But it's listed here so that it's given proper notice.
And also, beyond state of Georgia on infrastructure development, can you tell us a little bit about any federal programs such as grants or so forth that would help in the economic development area?
The USDA Rural Development Office has been very active in Georgia and has often partnered with community local funds, and I think in some cases One Georgia Fund as well. That is a possible source of assistance for infrastructure. In some cases, the Economic Development Administration, EDA, Department of Commerce, although it has been targeted for many cutbacks that have not gone through. One of the problems in my experience at the local level when I was there, with an EDA project, is the lead time required. You have to have a bird in hand many times, and the bird won't wait. It's a the need is for a quick and flexible source of infrastructure systems, particularly if it's for a specific project at bird in hand.
Again, on that same federal grant program, the DEDA, do you all assist local communities in any capacity in any type of grant writing or any assistance like that?
No, we have members who offer those services both on the private and public sector. We try to make our members aware generally of what other members provide, part of that networking function and professional development function, but the association itself does not do that.
Now, on the federal grant side, you mentioned the USDA, specifically the Department of Agriculture. Are there any other agencies in the federal government that maybe give any directly toward economic development?
Certainly the community development block grant and the employment assistance programs that come to our Department of Community Affairs from the federal Department of Housing and Urban Development are effectively used by many communities. Those are awarded in what they call non-entitlement communities on a competitive basis. Those in general are the smaller communities. So that's a very important function that DCA provides us is the administration of that program, which is federal money to begin with.
To your knowledge, how well are communities able to work time to what they can get from the state and federal government together? Is it sort of lopsided? They do better than one than the other, or do they gel together real well?
I think anything can be improved in that regard. I think you'll find examples of difficulty and success. Nothing really strikes me as outstanding one way or the other. It's a challenge, and I think one of the major challenges, again, is the timing, the lead time required to structure all these financial deals. Well, the state, there is some lead time, but the DCA and the state attempt to try to keep that as reasonable as possible. And it really depends on which local member of the EDA you're talking to in terms of their experience.
And one other follow-up on that, one of my MPP is trying to get an understanding of still on that type of legislation help. If there are tax incentives available to companies that are located in an area because of these types of grants, have you ever experienced situations where any of these grants or special loans may somehow adversely compromise whatever tax incentives that may be coming to them?
I'm trying to.
The two that have you expressed the two incentives have ever canceled the other one out?
I don't think so. I can't point to anything of that nature. At Volkman, it's input from a member of DEDA that has had experience with that, but I can't think of one.
On point 6, talking about the tax credits and how tax credits will be allowed to sale between Georgia manufacturing. You have a great idea about where and maybe include that in there. My question is, in your opinion, this may state this, and I may be missing, but should those tax credits, if industry or businesses other than manufacturing receive such credits, should the transaction or sale of credits cross business roofing?
Well, the way our work group and our board have stated this recommendation is to focus on Georgia manufacturers. And so within manufacturing, you have that flexibility across types. There are some who also would say, why restrict it to manufacturing, and that other businesses accomplish the same thing in terms of creating a value for the credit and stimulating business development. I think it might be appropriate if I could draw one other person into the answer to that question. And I want to ask John Bernal, who is with the firm of Arnall, Golden and Gregory, and is currently the chairman of our Public Policy Committee. And I think John may have some further thought on that, the sale of tax credits to authors. John, please.
Well, I think it's a policy decision of whether you're going to people can have a particular industry in which you can trade the credits or sell the credits. Obviously, it'd be much more of an incentive if you could just sell the credits, period. And I give you the film tax credits as a great example. I mean, that's great success, and it was created almost out of whole cloth in the last couple of years, 3 years. And it seems to be working swimmingly well. That is, credits are being sold, people are buying them. There are actually people who make a market in them. There are limitations on how much of a haircut can be taken on the tax credit. And it seems to be a pretty well thought out system. So the thought is you can take that, what we've learned from experience there, and it's just a policy decision of whether you're going to say, okay, these can only be sold to manufacturers, or can they be sold to, to any taxpayer who wants to buy them. How do you want to structure the program? So it's, I don't mean to punt back to y'all, but in the end, it's back to y'all. I would mention, well, I don't know, I'm an incrementalist, and I think a lot of our members are. Let's try something and see, let's try a piece and see if it doesn't run off the track, and if it doesn't, then maybe we can come back again and start opening up the number of folks that might be able to buy the credits. I did have one other thought when we were talking about infrastructure. I've never seen a situation where the grants really undercut the incentives. In fact, I've seen it in an awful lot of situations where without the grants there would have been no industry. In other words, they just don't have the infrastructure, and you can beg, borrow, and steal from. DCA does a wonderful job of reaching into every pot that they can possibly find to facilitate, as Colin said, the Economic Development Administration and Commerce Department is usually, it's almost like you want to build an industrial park and you got some while to do it, that'll work, but if you're going to try to deal with a prospect, forget it. They're not going to rise with the buck sometimes to make a difference. But I think the last legislative session, some of the legislative sessions, you dealt with trying to find a way to let private capital be involved in a public-private partnership. Frankly, I think some of our members who have been the recipients of big projects recently would agree that if we don't find some way, there's just not enough money for infrastructure. Some way, somehow, we're going to find a way to get private money in conjunction with public money, or we're just going to have a heck of a time of putting together the infrastructure for these prospects that we've been landing. And it's a struggle, I think Chris would say, and I think most of us involved in projects say, one of the hardest things is the infrastructure and how to pay for it, and who pays for it, and how quickly it has to be paid for.
One last question. Sure. Incentive, I think you went back to, do some type of development or environmental friendly way. Is this kind of like a little more?
Actually, I wish Chris were still here, because Chris was a member of our incentives work group and brought this idea forward. The point is simply that energy costs and other concerns affect business. Any cost affects business. And yet the investment in facilities that could save energy is substantial. It requires a substantial amount. And I think this is intended to suggest that we need to explore ways to make it easier for construction of industrial and commercial buildings that could meet these standards, help reduce costs of operation, and in that way, in that incremental way, make us more competitive. I'm not familiar with the standards and systems personally, but we can certainly provide that information to you if you like.
I think that would be good for us to know, in particular, how it relates to, air, soil, water, and so forth, and those issues, and maybe the regulation thereof. I know, I've received a lot of, communication regarding environment and regulation issues that pertain to the environment when it comes to this type of development. And I know that's a large issue, and it's a growing issue that isn't being addressed. Any more information that we have about that, I think would be helpful. If it doesn't have to be listed to the committee, I think there's no other and take care of it.
Right.
Last chance for committee to ask questions. We do get about 20 minutes till noon. Is there anyone else in here from DEDA that would like to bring up and make a point or go into more detail about some more information we do have that time. If anyone would like to make a comment on anything mentioned so far.
I did hear your warning about House Bill 218.
That's done. Would you like to comment on that?
I'm surprised I brought it up, but I did. Chris's answer was an excellent one. We need to be thinking about that subject in terms of providing information and remaining competitive. And it has to do with the timing of the release, not whether it's released. I think our members, particularly public development authority members and others responsible to a public employer that are involved in economic development, are keenly aware of the need and importance to sustain support for economic development efforts by remaining accountable and as open as possible. If there's anything economic developers like to do is provide the public with information about what they're doing. But the timing has to be right. And so our language related to that is expressed that way. We need legislation to provide for the timely release of information concerning our projects. And this legislation needs to treat state and local agencies equally. There was some discussion during that previous session about perhaps only the state needed protection. That's not the case. Any agency that would be subject to the Open Records, Open Meetings laws needs this economic development provision if we're going to remain or to be competitive. So what we were trying to suggest earlier was during this sensitive period of negotiation, everything that is agreed to is all conditional, whether it's permitting or zoning or incentives decisions. All of those have to come out into the public before any conditional agreement that might be negotiated can go forward. So there's no loss of opportunity for public comment or action in the public, but during that sensitive stage, the timing has to be right. Or as Representative said, we don't know who, when they have looked on the internet at Georgia's laws, has said, forget it, I don't want to deal with that. So we don't know when we're not considered.
Well, I appreciate you making that comment on that, and I believe I'm speaking for everyone here, and that bill came to the House. I think everyone in the vote did, because we understood it, we got it, and realized the problem didn't actually happen. It didn't shut down anything. It did exactly what we were doing.
And we certainly appreciate your leadership on that.
We have a little more questions for President Martin.
More of a clarification is one of the things about 218 that people brought up was you mentioned about zones and so forth. To my knowledge, that can't be part of a discussion anyway. The state or local government can't grant or commit to a zoning change as part of a negotiation. Looking at my colleague down there from the attorney, am I correct, Chairman Lawson? Zoning can't be granted as part of a negotiation. Maybe that's why I was so I just want to, I think you just kind of threw that in and didn't mean that the zoning itself.
Well, what I'm suggesting to you is if a company needed rezoning on a particular site, that could be an element of the discussion during the negotiation phase, and there might be an agreement to to follow the proper procedures in public to obtain such rezoning, but it can't be done in private.
Right, and that's the only reason I wanted to, because that was one of the arguments against 218.
Right.
Quite frankly, misunderstood by the public, that somehow something could show up next to them on a rezone piece of property and they would never know it. So, yeah, certainly that could be something that can be talked about with those rezoning hearings, and all the notices that go with those would have to be public, had 218 passed or anything.
That's exactly right.
That was not contemplated as short cut the zoning process.
Anyone from the EDA in the audience? Any final comments? We certainly appreciate you taking the time to come up here and speak with us and putting up with our questions. It helps me to learn a lot. I think I'm speaking for everyone here. It helps us figure out what approach we might need to take later on.
Thank you very much, and we'll stay with you during the process. Let us know if we can help.
We concluded this segment a little early, which is always a good thing. So at this time, we'll take a break, roughly a 2-hour break for lunch. We'll try to get started right back here at 2 o'clock sharp, so that we can try to get some of you folks going into Atlanta. Maybe we can go ahead and traffic on the opposite side of the anyway. So we'll break now and we'll resume here at 2 o'clock. All right, welcome back to the noon portion of this study committee hearing. I trust everyone had a good lunch. And without wasting any time, I would like to call on the Atlanta Metro Chamber of Commerce to please come up and give us a little talking to. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Understand that you had some fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and banana pudding. Is that right? No comment. Well, you know, I was going to, by the way, my name is Hans Gant. I'm with the Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce. I'm Senior Vice President for Economic Development. And I was going to do a 45-minute PowerPoint, but I learned that lesson a long time ago. You don't do that after lunch, and especially after fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and banana pudding. So I represent the Chamber of Commerce, the Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce, some 5,000 companies that are members of our Chamber of Commerce. I also represent the Metro Atlanta region when it comes to economic development. Work very closely with the Georgia Department of Economic Development. We're sewn to the hips in terms of recruiting companies and attracting companies to Georgia as well as to the Metro Atlanta region. But I also work very closely with our economic development partners in the 28 counties that make up Metro Atlanta. Several of those are here from Fulton County and Cobb County, etc. So we work very closely with those counties in helping recruit companies to the Metro Atlanta region. I want to thank you, Chairman Lewis, and your committee for taking on this task in terms of reviewing the incentive program that Georgia currently has. And I think it's a very opportune time to do that from a standpoint of how well we compete, not only against competitor states, but also how we compete around the world. You know, the last time Georgia really went through a major incentive review was back in the early 90s, which resulted in the formation of the BEST incentive program. And that program has served us pretty well over the last 15 or so years, but a lot has changed. The world has changed over that 15-year period. And particularly, the world has changed in such a way where our companies in our state and our cities have to compete for economic development projects not only with Alabama and South Carolina and Florida, but we have to compete with places like Vietnam today, China, India, Canada, Northern Ireland, and other places. So the world has really changed in terms of how we attract businesses. One of our the other factor is that our primary competitors, such as Florida and North Carolina and Texas, who we often compete against, they're not sitting still either. They're being very aggressive in terms of changing their tax policies and incentive programs so that they compete not only with us, but also compete in a global economy. The other factor is that our companies as well as companies that aren't in this area are having to compete globally as well. So they're looking for ways that they can be more efficient, more effective, and more competitive. So they no longer are looking only at locations in the United States, but they're looking at places abroad as well. Incentives, as a result of this, incentives and tax policy have become more and more a major consideration in their decision-making process. It used to be that the only considerations used to be the major decision-making factors. Find us a site, can we find the talent, is it a good place to live? But today, more and more, incentives are a big part of that decision-making process. All things being equal in terms of business locations, incentives can be a tiebreaker in a site selection decision-making process. And that's important for you to know. The other thing that has changed over the last 10 years, site selection process has gotten more and more scientific and is involving more and more site selection consultants that we work with on mostly major to medium-sized projects. And these site selection consultants know that the state of Georgia and other states are doing competitively in terms of trying to attract companies. And often, if there are certain things that companies are looking for in terms of incentives or tax policy that are not part of a state's or local program, often those communities or states are not even on the original short list of companies that they will consider. It's gotten to be that scientific. Another major factor is that traditionally, over the last 10 to 20 years, we've been focused on attracting manufacturing companies, processing companies, but more and more communities like ours, as well as communities in North Carolina and Florida, are focused on attracting high-value, high-pay, high-tech companies to their respective communities and states. And they are making changes in their incentive programs and in their tax policies to favor those kinds of industries. Our tax structure, our incentives, need to favor those kind of industries as well. Our chamber last year did a study on Georgia incentives in terms of how they compare with competitor states. And we will share that with you as we go along in this process. I know that you're going to have more hearings. And there's quite a bit of detail in terms of what we might want to look at in terms of our incentives when it comes to how do we best attract high-tech industries or corporate headquarters or the high-value, high-pay type companies. But also what we might want to do in terms of how can we streamline our incentive program that we currently have to be more effective as well. So we think there are clearly some opportunities to really enhance our current incentive program that we currently have that will also then enhance our competitiveness against other states. And just to give a few examples that I think that are some opportunities for us is, for example, our incentives, our current incentive program needs to be evaluated in terms of are they addressing the strategic industries that we're wanting to recruit to Georgia and to Metro Atlanta? For example, our chamber is very focused on attracting corporate headquarters to the Metro Atlanta region. We're also very focused on attracting high-tech companies that are in biotech and biomed, companies that are in the software development arena, companies that are in the IT industry sectors, and on. These are typically high-value, high-paying companies that we're focused on trying to attract to the Metro Atlanta region. At the same time, we're also focused on processes such as back office operations, high-value data centers that are important to technology companies, and so forth. And then, of course, we're also very focused on attracting high-value manufacturing companies to the Metro Atlanta region as well. We work very closely, again, with the state. Another opportunity, I think, is to really take a look at our current incentives in terms of can we streamline them in such a way that they can be more effective and timely and customer friendly to the companies that we're trying to recruit. A good example might be let's take a look at our corporate headquarters job tax credits. We've interviewed companies and we've interviewed site selection consultants on that particular incentive alone, and they have told us the process that Georgia uses on the headquarters job tax credits are very cumbersome, very time-consuming, very confusing. Our goal should be recruit high-value jobs, no matter what those jobs are, and recruit those to Georgia instead of trying to say, let's cherry pick each job that a company might bring and say, well, that one is eligible and that one is not eligible. So there's some things that we could do if it meets certain thresholds, certain things that we could do to streamline our process that would make us more competitive and effective against our competitors. Another example is that many of the statutory incentives that we have today, job tax credit being an example, a lot of companies can't even use those job tax credits. They're of no use to those companies. You may not know that a very high percentage of companies that come to Georgia or that are in Georgia actually don't have an income tax liability in the state of Georgia. So as a result, the job tax credits program that we currently have in our BEST legislation aren't even usable to those companies. So a lot of the companies that we would be recruiting may not have a tax liability. They can't make use of those incentives. So one of the things we may want to look at doing is letting companies apply those job tax credits not only against income, but other taxes, such as payroll withholding. That would be one example of things that we should look at doing with our incentive program. Another thing that we may want to look at is, our incentives are very similar to a lot of other states in terms of the kinds of incentives we offer, but the thresholds are different. For example, we may have a much lower value per job in terms of tax credits that we offer than our competitor states. So we may want to consider doing is taking a look at the baseline that we currently offer in terms of job tax credits and bringing them up to what other states are doing so that we have a level playing field. There are a lot of areas like that that we could look at in our program as well. A big factor, I think, from a deal closing standpoint is that we just don't have a sufficient fund, particularly for Metro Atlanta, sufficient funds to close the deal. We have I think Chris Clark mentioned the REBA program this morning. We probably need to look at, we should look at really significantly enhancing that REBA grant program. Currently it's maybe a $4 or $5 million a year program, and if we want to compete with other states, such as Texas and North Carolina, Florida, and Virginia, we really need to be thinking in excess of $25 million per year for that REBA grant program, if not $50 million. We need to have that in our toolkit. The governor needs to have that in his toolkit. Chris Clark and Craig Lesser need to have that in their toolkit to be able to close deals critical deals on behalf of the state of Georgia. So those are the kinds of things that there are opportunities to streamline and enhance what we currently have, but there are also opportunities to add some new things to our plate as well, our toolkit, particularly those things that would benefit the high-tech, high-value, high-pay jobs. Typically, the high-tech companies that we will attract or create out of our own research and development program here in the state of Georgia are small companies, the medium-sized companies that will have no immediate tax liability. So we need to find creative ways that incent those companies to stay and grow here in Georgia. So with that said, gentlemen, I'd be happy to take some questions.
No questions? Before you sit down, if you would, the other two presenters have given their thoughts on the confidentiality in recruiting, House Bill 218. Would you mind sharing with us your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't know if you recall, but our chamber recently went through a major debate with our local newspaper, the AJC, on this whole issue of open records as it pertains to a project that we were going through with NASPA Hall of Fame. And so, you know, this issue is very dear to our heart. Now, our chamber board, the businesses that make up our Chamber of Commerce are not opposed to open records. But unfortunately, we're not playing on a level field when it comes to what other states are doing or may not be doing. You know, if there was a level playing field and all states had to play by the same rules, this wouldn't be an issue. But it is. It is an issue because that level playing field is not level. There's a time and place for everything, and I think some of our colleagues here have expressed their sentiments. You know, at the end, when a deal has been made, I think the records ought to be wide open for observation and criticism. But while the deal is made, in order to keep our competitive edge, I think we need to, have a policy that allows the deal to be made. A good example of what we're up against on major projects, many companies ask us to sign confidentiality agreements. That means you will not disclose our discussions publicly. And if we refuse to sign those confidentiality agreements, well, we don't even get asked to compete. They won't even consider us to compete. Another factor, there are examples where we have benefited from another state's misstep on open records. Because we kept our word and another state didn't, we actually won the project. So we have actually benefited from having a proactive confidentiality agreement with companies. So I think, there's a time and place for everything, but we're not opposed to disclosing information at the end of the deal.
Thank you. One more question that I have. It goes back to corporate headquarters incentives. It seems to me in the past two sessions we've dealt with that issue of trying to recruit more corporate headquarters to Georgia. But a federal lawsuit, if I'm remembering correctly, stood in the way of certain aspects of that. Does that sound familiar? And if so, would you expound on that and what we can do?
Well, I think there was a lawsuit which was found in the favor of the state. In the favor of the state. I think what we have today in terms of our headquarters job tax credit is we have had opportunities to attract other major headquarters to Georgia and to Atlanta. But our process was so cumbersome and in some instances so long that it really turned the company off to the state of Georgia. And I think ultimately was a factor in the decision-making process of not coming here. So I think we need to look at how can we make not only the headquarters job tax credits, but other incentives that are part of our toolkit usable and not so cumbersome to actually access and be eligible for. You know, if they meet a certain payroll requirement or a certain average pay, you know, that may be one of the things we want to look at in terms of considering as a threshold.
Did I understand you to say early that the Metro Chamber has done a study of the incentive packages that some of the more aggressive states that we have to compete with have been utilizing?
Yes.
And can we be provided with that at some point during this committee's work?
We will be happy to provide the details of that study to you. And you know, as you get into the discussion in terms of what ought to be done for this industry versus that industry, we can provide that kind of insight to you as well.
Good, thank you.
Thank you. Could we step back to follow up on Chairman Lewis' question? What makes the process cumbersome? You mentioned the corporate headquarters tax credit. What makes the process cumbersome without going into too much of granularity? I mean, is it the statute that enables the credit? Is it the implementation of the statute?
It may be a little bit,
or is it a combination of the?
It may be a little bit of both of the statute and the interpretation and the way that it's administered. You know, for give you an example, let's say you have a company that's interested in possibly locating here in Georgia or in Atlanta, and they say they're going to create, if they come here, they would create 1,000 jobs in their headquarters. And one of the things that we have to go through today in order to get the project qualified for the job tax credit, headquarters job tax credit, is we actually have to go through a process of looking at each one of those 1,000 jobs and make a determination of whether or not each one of those particular jobs counts as being eligible for the job, for the headquarters job tax credit. You have to actually make a decision, okay, that job counts, that one doesn't. The other thing that we have to do is then look at each one of those jobs in terms of the salary of that job and determine, does it meet the wage requirements that we want? Now, going through that process may take several weeks in terms of back and forth with the company and with our officials, and that kind of turns companies off. Then when they learn through that process that only half of the jobs that they would be creating as a result of that review count in terms of the job tax credits, they get turned off again. So they get turned off by how much time it takes to make a determination. Then they get turned off, wow, we're creating 1,000 jobs, but only half of them count. Seems to us that if we're coming here to create 1,000 new jobs, then all 1,000 of those jobs ought to count toward the job tax credit. Those are the kind of things that I'm talking about.
Okay, and let me follow up with that, and maybe this is an offline drill down for the committee, if Chairman Wister, or at least you and I. But when you say we have to account that, I mean, is that in the letter of the statute that those, that level of granularity is required? Is it something that they choose to do because they want to know exactly how many of those jobs are going to qualify when they come in? Does the statute itself call for that level of granularity between the job to qualify or not?
It does call for some of that granularity, but there's also room for interpretation there.
And then I guess I'll just leave the last question or the last comment is I'd like to know, where that is, if the intent of the legislation is being followed, and if there's something we can do to simplify that, because if it's taking up their time and the Chamber's time, it's got to be taking up resources on the state side to try to account for that. And the intent is to bring business to Georgia without giving away too much to get that business, and to find out if, I think that's what our committee is trying to do, is to find out if the intent of the legislation is being followed, and if it is or is not, if it were being followed, is that what is good for an ongoing pro forma basis for Georgia? Do we need to make it simpler? Do we need to count more jobs? Those are the things we perhaps need to go into a study you've done, when we've won, when we haven't won, and find out, did we let one get away we would like to have?
Sure. We'd love to share you more details on that example and others. I will say this, I don't think there's any intent on anybody's part to skirt the regulations of the statute. I think everyone believes that they are doing what needs to be done in accordance with the statute. And I'm talking from the perspective of when a company is approaching us and looking at what they have to go through in order to get approval and get their project eligible for the incentives. It's much more cumbersome and time-consuming here than it is in other states. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Hans, for doing that. Next on the program, we have a presentation from the Georgia Chamber of Commerce. This is our last scheduled presentation of the day, so there we are.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for allowing us to be a part of your program today. A couple of comments. My name is Joe Fleming. I'm Senior Vice President of Government Affairs for the Georgia Chamber of Commerce. The topic today is the sort of the history of business incentives and using the lessons that we've learned in the past as a springboard and a platform for the future. And I think it's appropriate to give credit to the General Assembly in Georgia and the administration for some of the great things that they've done and that y'all have done to keep Georgia a great destination for business. And although we're at that point in our future where we ought to be looking at what needs to be done to keep Georgia as a leader in the pack and competitive, I just want to take a moment to recap some of the things that have been done in the last several years that we at the Georgia Chamber believe are critical in keeping Georgia competitive and making Georgia the preferred destination for business. Tort reform passed in 2005. I think it's one of the most significant things that the legislature could have done to keep jobs here in Georgia and to attract new businesses. And when we talk with businesses that are located in here, in rural Georgia, in the city of Atlanta, all across the state, and businesses that are interested in moving to Georgia, the fact that Georgia has moved from the 45th worst place in legal environment to the 10th best place in terms of legal environment because of the 2005 reform, that in itself is a significant incentive for business and for job growth. The passage of the single factor is a very important piece of legislation. The phase out of the estate tax is a very critical piece of some of the business incentive work that's been done in the past. And then at a broader level, workforce development and education. We continue to work at it. It's a top priority for the Georgia Chamber. I know it's a top priority for the Georgia General Assembly and the governor, but we've got to continue to work on making our workforce ready and employable as a way to attract new business and grow jobs here in Georgia. I'm delighted that this study committee in particular has been formed because it shows a visionary future about Georgia. We're good. We're not the best, but we need to prepare because the competition around us is getting more aggressive every day. In Florida and South Carolina, Alabama, Tennessee are all taking steps and aggressive steps to make themselves stand out. and they've, in some ways, caught up with us. And there's some critical areas we're looking at that we want to recommend to the legislature this year that you adopt that we think are essential in continuing Georgia to stand out as a leader in the Southeast and in the nation in terms of an attractive climate for business, the quality of life, and job growth. One of the things that we're announcing today with Governor Perdue in Augusta, our CEO, George Israel, is at a news conference this afternoon to announce the formation of a work-ready certificate program where communities in Georgia can have their workforce and their population certified as work-ready, so that when a potential Kia comes looking at spots, communities can distinguish themselves as having the kind of workforce that's needed and in place. So this sort of workforce development program, working with local communities, we think is an important step in moving forward to show that our communities are ready to take on the next big project here. The other thing that we're doing is we've created a new committee at the Georgia Chamber of Commerce. Unfortunately, our co-chairman, Guy Griswold, is here of the committee. But to parallel and to work with the Business Incentive Committee, we've created the Georgia Chamber Taxation and Business Incentive Committee. It's chaired by Terry Lawler with Verizon and co-chaired by Guy Griswold from Griswold Lesser. We held our first meeting of the committee 2 weeks ago, I guess now. Largest attendance at an off-session committee meeting we've ever had. Our conference room at the Georgia Chamber probably seats about 50 people. I'd guess we had 75 to 100 people there. All interested in doing what is fiscally responsible for the state, what's good for job growth, and what's ethical and the right thing to do. And what I'd like to do, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, is just to report to you on some of the things that we discussed at that meeting and some of the priorities that appear to be merging for the Georgia Chamber in 2007 that are consistent with your mission. One of the clear things that came out of our Business Incentive Committee meeting is a commitment from the Georgia Chamber to make one of our top priorities the enactment of relief in the area of sales tax on energy on manufacturing process. This has been a concept that's been in the legislature now for a couple of years. It hasn't moved. This is the year to move it. And it's an important part of Georgia's public policy, an important part of our taxation plan. Manufacturing sector has taken a hit like no other sector in Georgia, not because of anything the political leadership has done in Georgia, but we live in an extremely competitive market, a globally competitive market, and a very competitive market in the Southeast. And one specific area where we lag behind our neighbors is that we fully tax energy used in the manufacturing process. None of our neighbors in the Southeast do that. And we believe strongly at the Georgia Chamber, and it will be one of our top priorities to ensure the passage of that legislation so that the manufacturing base in Georgia can continue to grow here and we can attract new investment in Georgia. And this is an issue, when you speak of manufacturing, I think of the big pulp and paper mills and the carpet and textile industry, and it does affect those industries, no doubt. But it also affects print shops and affects the Coca-Cola Company and companies like Publix that can and manufacture goods in Georgia for distribution throughout their chain. There are many members of the Chamber of Commerce across the board that have a strong interest in the enactment of relief in the area of sales tax on energy and manufacturing. I'll point out that in Georgia, in a 5-year period between 1999 and 2004, we lost 100,000 manufacturing jobs in Georgia. Again, it's because of competition, and we've got to, if we want to keep that sector of our economy an important part of the fabric of Georgia's economy, we've got to do something about the manufacturing side of our businesses. Wisconsin has just enacted it. It's interesting to note that in the state of Arkansas, the concept of repealing the sales tax on energy in manufacturing is actually a campaign issue embraced by candidates from both sides of the aisle. So not only is it good public policy, it's an idea that ought to be embraced by everyone as a positive step in Georgia's future. Other issues that our Business Incentive Committee is aggressively looking at, and we formed kind of a tax expert committee to advise those of us that aren't tax experts, comprised of CPAs. I know Tom Harrell was in the audience today. Tom's assisting that, other tax attorneys. We have a strong interest in passage of relief in the area of inventory tax. There are a number of sectors that have been given relief from the inventory tax, but it's still a tax that hits our retailers and creates a situation where they're not as competitive as they should be with some of our border communities, particularly. The Business Senate Committee is very interested in research and development tax credits. An issue that I don't believe I've heard raised today that we also we endorsed last year and would like to see enacted in 2007 is the allowance for private equity investment in state pension plans. We believe not only is that a good public policy move, but it's a good way to attract new capital to Georgia. A few years ago, when the federal government made changes to the capital gains rate, Georgia's capital gains rate became decoupled with the federal standard. We've talked some with Chairman Larry O'Neill about this. It's an area that anything to do with depreciation schedules and capital gains is a strong interest in business. We're in a situation where computers and equipment become obsolete before they're written off the schedule. And while that's largely a federal issue, there is a Georgia tax attached to that. And when the federal government cut, we remained the same and became decoupled from the federal rate. And we think that should be addressed. The Chamber also takes a strong position on the issue of tourism and supports greater funding for tourism. Georgia lags behind our neighbors and frankly is near last in the state in terms of funding for tourism. We have many natural resources and attractions here that we would support investment in funding for the tourism industry in Georgia. Tort reform, which I mentioned from 2005, there may be some additional tort reform and legal reforms that we want to consider in 2007, and we're looking at the possibility of those. An idea that you might want to consider, or Chairman Ralston may want to consider, is the creation of a business court. A number of our members have experimented with this in Atlanta, which has a pilot project in business court, and they think that it works quite well, and we'd like to see some more attention and study on the idea of creating a business court throughout the state of Georgia. Lastly, Mr. Chairman, I just want to echo many of the comments of those that have come before. The Georgia Chamber was an amicus filer with the Metro Atlanta Chamber on the negotiations and incentives and public record issue. And we feel very strongly that Georgia needs to remain competitive with our neighbors, and we are at a significant disadvantage when it comes to landing those big projects that so many states are competing for these days. And we'll be happy to stand with any supporter of that in 2007 and argue for change in the law. Those are my comments. That's where we are now. Our Business Incentive Committee will continue to meet. In fact, I think we have a meeting next week to continue to refine some of our suggestions and to gather additional research and to get feedback from our members. But one thing I do want to tell you today is that the one thing that I'm certain that we've agreed upon is that sales tax on energy must be removed for the good of the Georgia economy, for the sake of our manufacturing sector. And with that, Mr. Chairman, with your permission, there are a number of my members in the audience today. I'd be happy, with your permission, to yield any of my time to them if they have any additional comments that they would like to make.
Thank you for that. Before we get into that aspect, any members here have questions, comments? I think you covered things fairly well there. I know as we progress with these meetings, of course, we'll be getting into more details, and obviously the energy sales tax exemption is something that we're definitely going to keep in the conversations here. It's a particular passion of mine to keep that issue going. It's about 2:45, so and the presentations are effectively done. We allowed the 4 o'clock just in case we needed that time, but apparently a lot of good information has come forth well before that time. So in the next 15 minutes, if there is anyone associated with the Georgia Chamber or the Atlanta Metro Chamber who would like to make a few comments that are additional to what we've already heard, feel free to do so. Just step right up. We'll be glad to hear from you.
My members are very bashful, Mr. Chairman.
Just for today.
Just today.
Anyone, I notice we have a few representatives from several departments of the state here other than economic development. If any of you would like to make a few comments. I'm not going to point you out because you may not want to, but I just want you to feel like you have this opportunity if you're so inclined. We got a question. Hold on, we got a question. Just hold that thought.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. I have just a kind of a quick question. When you're competing in a free market enterprise system trying to attract businesses to Georgia, many of our sister states don't have an income tax. Would it behoove us from economic development standpoint to not have a corporate income tax? Would it make it simpler for attracting businesses? Or what about an ELOS, an economic local option sales tax? So you want to attract a manufacturing plant to say West Point. Local government can enact that you would have then money to offset their utilities and to bring in that industry and create their infrastructure. Have you all ever thought in that direction?
It's an excellent question. In fact, we just completed a survey of our membership on some of their top priorities, and quite a significant number of our members expressed an interest in flattening the personal income tax and believe that that's an important business incentive. And our Taxation and Business Incentive Committee is looking at that. We've not taken a formal position on it, but certainly the fact that Tennessee and Florida don't have a personal income tax is noteworthy and probably assist them in attracting some businesses. But at this point, we've not taken a position on it, and we're going to continue to look at it at this point. But certainly you do hear a lot of, when we travel the state, I hear that issue a lot, whether it's John Linder's flat tax or some of the members of the legislature that want to eliminate or flatten the income tax in Georgia. And the same applies for corporate income tax as well.
One more question, Mr. Chairman, if I could follow up. You know, as we travel around the state and in the legislature, we'll continuously hear about how we don't fully fund education. We've heard that, I'm sure, a time or two per day, about how we don't give the local schools enough money. Well, the fact that they rate 49th or 50th in the nation, does that affect you in trying to bring business to Georgia?
Without question. Absolutely it does.
Just curious.
Don't know how much, I'm not an education expert, I don't know how much that is a factor of funding.
It's not.
And there's some creative solutions that have been proposed that I think that we believe will make a difference in the future. I think the dropout counselor rate, dropout counselors is an excellent idea. There are a number of education initiatives, but having a qualified, educated workforce is probably one of the most significant incentives a state can offer. Because if you don't have the labor, if you don't have an educated workforce to do the job, the company's not going to come and build there. You have the educated workforce, they will come.
As a follow-up, the reason I say that is Georgia Tech, we actually test a disproportionately high percentage of our high school students on the SAT, compared to some states who test 2 to 4% of their students, and we're testing at a much higher number, which then it appears that we're 49th or 50th in the nation, which makes it a little hard for you to attract a business when you say, oh, by the way, that's not real. We're not really all that stupid. Okay? We just test too many of them. Now, that's stupid, but the kids aren't. So I was just kind of curious how that played into it, but I appreciate your response.
You cannot separate business incentive and business and economic development from the education system and from the perception, right or wrong, of Georgia standing amongst its sister states.
Joe, I appreciated you listing as one of the priorities increased funding for tourism. Does the chamber, what would they propose to do if there were more money being spent on tourism in Georgia? Specifically, where would you put it?
We have a terrific chairman. We have a tourism committee at the Georgia Chamber, also chaired by Ed Hayes with Deloitte Touche. And, of course, we work very closely with Joy and her group. And at our most recent meeting of our tourism committee at the board, at our board of directors meeting, the consensus that I can report to you is that we don't spend enough, and our effort is not coordinated well enough, that it's rather fractured, and that strategic collaboration and an investment of more dollars is necessary in our tourism effort. We have a situation that works to some degree, but everyone is everybody is doing their own thing, and there's a very limited amount of coordination there. And part of that is a function of the fact that we have a relatively small appropriations for our promotion, and we ought to do more in that area. I've heard people suggest that we double the amount for tourism, and although we have not specifically taken a position on that issue, I can't imagine why the Georgia Chamber wouldn't support that.
All right. Thanks. Still have a few minutes, and I'll offer a stand if there's anyone else with the state that would like to say a few words. You don't have to. It's just an opportunity available to you. I'm sure you'll have plenty of chances later down the road.
Mr. Chairman, Kevin Curtin sings Feeling by Morris Albert very well.
We got one more question, if you don't mind.
Yes, sir. I do. Sorry, I held off to the end just to lay it all on one person at one time. I apologize. I have a question. It appears that many communities around the state are acquiring this propensity to enact local impact fees, commercially and residentially. And I understand they're very popular. Are you finding that as being a little bit of a hindrance in economic development when they're in some of your areas, for instance, in Henry County, they're imposing up to $30,000 impact fee on a commercial structure? That is for your sewer water tap just to build the building. Is that affecting you guys at all?
I have to plead ignorance on that one, sir. I have not heard that. It may or may not be. I just have not heard that. Generally on local issues, would defer to the local government to make the decision for themselves what's best for their community, but I've not heard that.
No, I was just curious if it was any reverberations down the line. It appears to be a local issue in many of your counties and cities, and municipalities are addressing it. If it's not impacting you, we'll leave it alone.
Well, I suspect if a company's decided they want to come to Georgia, it might affect where in Georgia where they locate, but we want them to come to Georgia.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
We have one more question.
For registries and from last session, never mind, sorry. On email registries, that's what it was, yes.
Just to follow up on your group that's getting together on business incentives. In that group, do you have anybody engaged from Georgia State as far as helping you? I mean, you probably have that expertise, in the business community, but I guess I'm just curious because the one thing that I've heard from people, the rank and file citizen around Georgia is a lot of people look at business incentives as if they're not benefiting directly from them as an individual. They wonder, is that money not best spent in Medicaid or peach care or, education? And I guess what I would believe if you bring forward, initiatives for this committee to consider and by proxy the legislature to consider, if we had the entire, soup to nuts look at it, if we do this, it costs this much these first few years, but look what happens in years 4, 5, 6, and 7. Because at the end of the day, we'll generate more revenue if we attract some of these businesses.
We have
access. As you bring them forward, I guess my request would be you probably get somebody at GSU's policy group to help with that. I'm sure you have the expertise in the business community, but I know that you could probably engage someone from the Robinson School or UGA or Georgia Tech or a number of the colleges and probably love to be engaged in that just with their students to sort of do a projection down the road for what would happen if we can take some of these.
It's terrific.
What would Georgia look like 5, 7, 10 years from now?
Whatever we bring forward as recommendation, I hope that you consider, as I said earlier, I feel strongly that it needs to be priced accurately. It needs to be reflective of a futuristic vision for Georgia, and that it be good for the people in the state of Georgia. And we've got to quantify what we bring forward. And to that extent, we should absolutely bring the academic community into that. And I will.
All right. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Mr.
Appreciate that. Any closing comments from any other committee member up here? Our tentative date for our next meeting will be in September, and we're looking at September the 27th, and the meeting will be in Savannah, most likely be in Savannah. We've got a lot to line up between now and then, and that's why the large gap in time between now and then. We were looking at a week prior to that, but that is also a meeting of the Tax Reform Study Committee, and we do not want to conflict because I know a number of you have interest in both committees and want to attend both. So we're trying to be mindful and respectful of that. So we're tentatively looking at September the 27th. I believe that's a Thursday. In Savannah. One of the topics will be tourism, and another topic will be forthcoming. So with that, I really do appreciate all of you attending. Look forward to seeing you at the next meeting, and have a safe travel. Thank you.